Just giving this a few minutes to boot up. Hello, I can't see who's in here, but I can see messages that come up. Hello from Los Angeles. I hope you're doing well there. What time is it there? It's like 10:45. So Dave, everything is back to normal in China more or less, but the thing is, there's a new normal, right? You know, mask wearing is part of the culture now. You know, my kids going to school, they've got to go through temperature checks. There's barriers between them when they're eating in the cafeteria. So it depends on what you mean by normal, because some of these things might go away, but our normal will never ever be like yesterday's normal. You know, it's so there's going to be permanent habit changes, and I think that's probably going to be true for everywhere in the world. So business is, hello, Yuan, Sean? Business is starting to get back to normal. It's still a little bit slower than it would normally be during this time, but we're starting to see it kind of really pick up now. When will, hey, from Hawaii, nice. When will China allow foreigners back in? I'm not sure. This is something I'm trying to help one of my friends with also, who's stuck in Hong Kong for 2 months. You know, he's going through a really tough time. His father even passed away a couple days ago, and his girlfriend's over here, and he's just stuck alone in Hong Kong. He doesn't know anybody, and he can't come back in. Shenzhen is his home. It's really frustrating. Apparently there are some new changes coming soon, but I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Before they said that if you had a new visa after March 31st, you could come in. My visa was renewed after March 31st in China, but even if my connection isn't great, I might lose you. I don't know enough about his statement and his history, that football player, to really cover that. That's not something I really looked at enough. Yeah, that's right, Caleb. Malls are packed here. I'm just looking through some of the comments if I missed any. I'm just doing something random just to kind of answer some questions from China. The security law, the national security law. So, of course, Hong Kong needs a national security law. And all the countries that are telling China that there will be repercussions for introducing a security law all have their own national security laws, the worst of which are from the U.S. If you look at what has been implemented under national security law in the U.S., from the Patriot Act to Muslim registries and stuff like that. So they have no place to say that Hong Kong doesn't deserve a National Security Act. You can just look at one single event. For example, last year there was a video, a live stream of Steve Bannon with Miles Guo directing the Hong Kong protesters, saying, okay, second wave, move over here, third wave over here. This is from Miles Guo's own live stream. Then there's a follow-up video of him coaching Baggio, I don't know how to pronounce his name. His last name is Liang. He's the leader of the National Front Party in Hong Kong. So you can see Miles Guo talking to him, saying he will get all the support he needs from the U.S. government. They've got all the support he needs financially. And then, like a few weeks after that live stream, he was arrested with one of the largest explosive hauls in Hong Kong's history. So if you look at that and you see that America, who has Steve Bannon on these live streams coaching Hong Kong protesters, saying that they don't deserve a national security law, come on, like it's absolutely crazy. What is the relationship like between Canada and China's government? You know what, I heard that Canada isn't going to retaliate for the ruling that Meng Wanzhou meets double criminality. But I don't know. I still think it's definitely going to put a stress on the relationship. There's not this. There's not a very anti-Canadian sentiment or anything like that going on here. But I honestly think it's something that Canadians should feel shame for just being kind of America's lapdog there for a second. Taking the US dollar, which is the global reserve currency, and weaponizing it. Basically penalizing people for doing business with countries that America doesn't want them to do business with. If you look at, they even fined European banks a lot of money because they were doing business with Iran in the US dollar. when actually it was America who was in the wrong because they walked away from the JCPOA deal. They were the ones who broke contract, which is another irony because they're trying to convince everybody that you can't trust China, and they're the ones who don't stick to agreements. So they broke the JCPOA agreement, then they're long because they have so much jurisdiction over the US dollar. And there are European banks that were fined millions and millions of dollars for doing business with Iran, which they can legally do, but because the transaction was done in US dollar. And this is why they came up with an alternate money settling system. I think it was called Intex or something like that, to try to get around America's bullying. And so I honestly think this is a really stupid decision from the US because a lot of US's power comes from the US dollar. So if they're going to start screwing around with people and weaponizing it, people are going to start looking for alternatives. And that's going to be a very scary thing for America when suddenly people are looking for an alternative to the US dollar. The U.S. can almost indiscriminately print as many U.S. dollars as they want with limited, short-term consequences at least, compared to other countries that have no other choice but to loan. Like Iran, Iran applied to the International Monetary Fund. Can you guys still hear me? I don't see any comments coming in. I want to make sure I haven't lost you guys. Yeah, let me know if you guys can still hear me. I want to make sure I'm not just talking to myself. But where was I? Yeah, so you applied for emergency relief from the International Monetary Fund, and they were declined, of course, because it was from American influence, which is another irony, that America is continually saying that the WHO is a puppet of the Chinese government with no actual evidence of that, when there's clear evidence that the IMF is a puppet of the American. So just all around ironies. Let me see if I'm still getting chats coming in. Okay. Oh, good. I can see you guys can hear me. For some reason, I've got to manually bring up the comments each time. Again, okay, here. So I saw one comment about renaming the road in Washington, D.C. to Liwanliangjie. You know what's really funny about that? The senator who proposed that is Tom Cotton. And Tom Cotton, he's trying to crap on China as much as he can, but he's too stupid to realize that he's actually helping them. And actually, out of all of the senators in the US, Tom Cotton probably has the highest approval rating with Chinese. Because first of all, he wants to rename the road in Washington, D.C. to Liwanliang Road, to commemorate the whistleblower doctor, which has some issues with the way that they understand the story. But the thing is Li Wenliang was a member of the Chinese Communist Party. He was a vocal supporter of the Hong Kong police, and he's a hero in China to the government and to the people. So when he wants to rename a road in Washington, D.C. to a Chinese Communist Party hero, they're like, hey, thank you, Tom Cotton, as far as they're concerned. Then the second thing he's doing now, his latest thing, is he wants to offer, what do you call it, a refugee status for Hong Kong protesters so that they can go to America and claim asylum in the U.S. And so Chinese people are really happy about that too. They're like, take them. There's so many people in Hong Kong who can't speak out against these protesters, but who've given up on Hong Kong. They've given up hope on Hong Kong because these people exist in Hong Kong society, and they're looking at Tom Cotton saying, we'll take them from you. They're like, thank you. Take them. And of course, your police are going to be able to handle what they do during their peaceful protests way better than our police can. Because, obviously I'm being sarcastic, they're not peaceful. They're throwing Molotov cocktails into police stations, at police cars. They're destroying the metro systems. If they try to do that the next time they're angry in America, American police can handle these Hong Kong thugs way better than the Hong Kong police can. And of course, better is a subjective word, but you know what I'm trying to say here. That they have no idea what's in for them if they try to do that same thing in the US. But by taking them away and allowing the people who love Hong Kong, who like the system, who want to continue living there, it is the perfect solution. And mainland Chinese heard that Tom Cotton wants to accept these Hong Kong protester. Hand holding my phone, I keep losing my connection. But let's see. So English teaching would, as somebody who wanted to live in China for a long time, would I still suggest English teaching as a starting point? A comment from Foreign Finance. I think it's fine to kind of get your foot in the door, but the thing you got to be careful about is it seems like that's the kind of job here where it's easy to just become complacent, and it's easy to just not aspire for anything more. You know, you've got really short hours, you're treated pretty well. That may change in the future, but you can do it. But if you come in knowing that this is a temporary foot in the door thing, you've just got to make sure you remember that. If you're here 5-6 years later and you're still doing that when it was supposed to be a temporary thing, well, hey, if you're happy doing it, then fine. But don't forget your original goals, because it's easy to just become complacent. So that's the only thing I'd say about this, about the idea of getting your foot in the door in an English teaching position. It's a fine way to get your foot in the door. Okay, I've got some people saying I'm breaking up a little bit. It is raining here, Bruce. Yeah, I'm just looking through some of the old comments. It's going to be a pretty rainy, and that's why we're not going out with the family anyway today. Dan T, the digital yen, I think definitely might be a solution to the weaponized US dollar. And there's a lot of countries who are already settling in the renminbi, and in relation to trading with China. You know, outside of the Middle East, these other countries, they're settling their oil transactions in renminbi. Trying to see if missed any more comments here. Am I still coming through pretty clear? Like the image is clear, the sound is clear, or is it choppy? Let me know, guys. I haven't had any comments for 4 minutes. Have I lost you guys? Send some comments through if you're still hearing me loud and clear. Or if I'm actually using, I could use my Hong Kong SIM card, which doesn't require a VPN. It'll be pretty quick. But then I'm using up my Hong Kong data. Let me do that. Hold on a second. I might lose you guys for about 30 seconds. So hang on tight. All right, I think this should be better. Okay, so image was clear, but I was buffering. So let me know if now it's much better. I'm using my Hong Kong SIM card directly. So how the Hong Kong protests are viewed in China, it's really kind of a mixed bag. But I think most people are really focused. Nancy Pelosi saying that the Hong Kong protests were a beautiful sight. How you had Josh Hawley coming over and saying, I've been inspired by these protesters who I met with on the ground, and they're really, really respect them. But he's not meeting with his own protesters, and he's calling them thugs that need to be, controlled right away, when they're doing pretty much the same things the Hong Kong protesters are doing. Don't be mistaken. There was looting, there was burning, there was destruction of police vehicles in Hong Kong also. So I think the most interesting part of the whole thing is the double standard. So that's what you're hearing from most from the people here. But yeah, it's an interesting kind of a situation to see unfold. It's an unfortunate situation to see unfold, but it's interesting that it's provided a lot of perspective. You know, if you remember when there was a rumor going around that Hong Kong was going to introduce a curfew, and there were groups in the U.S. who said if Hong Kong introduces a curfew, there should be consequences for China. They never introduced the curfew, and the U.S., after how many days of protests, introduced a curfew. Where are those voices now? What do they have to say about consequences for the U.S.? Why is that not reasonable for when you've got rioting? There were going to be very strong consequences if the People's Liberation Army was deployed into the streets of Hong Kong. And they never were, unless you count the time when they came out of their Kowloon Tong barracks to clear up the bricks and the destruction that protesters did in front of an old people's home, which was severely limiting the access for these senior citizens living in these homes in case they had an emergency and needed to be transferred to the hospital. So the PLA came out of their barracks and they cleaned up the bricks. They're in the streets cleaning up your crap. But back onto the main point is there were supposed to be severe consequences for China if they deployed military in the streets, and they never did after over a year of protests and riots. How quickly did we see guys in military gear with fully automatic machine guns in the U.S. in the streets? Pretty darn quickly. Let me see what else we got here. Apologies if the phone's a little bit shaky. I'm hand-holding it here. Did you guys see like any of the what were you guys seeing on the narrative for the June 4th Tiananmen Square events kind of commemorations? What I saw was just a lot of hypocrisy. I obviously wrote something about it as well on my Twitter, kind of remembering the people who died. There were a lot of, there were a few, well, obviously a lot of people think thousands of people died, even though BBC, AP, UPI, all of the on-the-ground forum workers, the leaked cable from the U.S. Embassy, they all basically say that that's impossible, that many people died. But I think that's besides the point. Still, the main thing is that there were a lot of people using this as a demonstration. And in Hong Kong, so they were so anxious, the protesters, to commemorate mainlanders from 1989 who lost their lives. Why don't you look at how are they treating mainlanders in Hong Kong in 2020? If they care about mainlanders so much, why is there so much discrimination against mainlanders? Why are they beating up mainlanders? Why are they searching people who speak Mandarin, searching their phone to see what pictures they took? Why is Joshua Wong, the hero of this movement, not willing to condemn attacks against mainlanders? He was asked point blank if he condemns attacks against mainlanders in Hong Kong. And his answer was more or less that it was he refused to condemn it, and he said that it's a trial and error process. So now on June 4th, you're going to pretend like you give a shit about mainlanders? Honestly, I'm sorry. I don't really. No, I'm not going to swear. I'm not going to do it. But he can. And then the further the hypocrisy is Pompeo last year on the State Department's website commemorated the 30th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square protests. And when the 50th anniversary of the Kent State shootings, where their own military shot unarmed students, the 50th anniversary, Pompeo didn't have a single word to say about it. There was nothing written on the State Department's website. And then of course, when the 31st rolled around, he has something to say again. So here we are. We're talking about this event where hundreds of people died, but even if you want to take their false number, even if you want to take their number that is backed up by nothing, that tens of thousands of people died, every single year, America's own police kill 1,000 people per year in the streets. So just with that number alone, they far exceeded the number of deaths in Tiananmen Square, even if you were to use their fake number. And then aside from that, since 9/11 in all of their proxy wars, they've killed up to, this is a conservative estimate, 6 million people. To this day in Vietnam, babies are being born with birth defects from American chemical weapons. And you're still talking about this event from 31 years ago, and you've got shit all to say about what you've done? This is not about caring about the people on the ground. This is all politics, and it's all absolute BS that is being exposed here. And it's just, you can see the panic from these people because, the napalm and the Agent Orange, you can see the hypocrisy, and you can see the panic now because now they realize they've got very little ground to stand on. They can't kind of stand on this pedestal now and virtue signal about Hong Kong protests and all this stuff. And then so you see them just panicking and doing these things. Like Ted Cruz today posted a picture, Amazon.com, and the only seller available was from China, and it only arrived now, and it was bent out of shape. That's what he's outraged at, to say, Jesus, China. That's how desperate they're getting. And it also shows that how hard they try to shit on China, yet at the end of the day, they still can't even wipe their own ass without China. That's something to think about. But that's what Ted Cruz, a senator, is on his Twitter posting pictures of toilet paper that arrived too late from China during a pandemic. Other comments we've got here I've missed. I wasn't really reading them when this was coming through. Okay. Is what China doing to Australia fair? So I think with the investigations of coronavirus, I think they're actually open to that idea. They've signed other documents that talk about joint research groups, but the problem is with a lot of the other a lot of the countries who are asking for this investigation, it's coming from a politicized point of view. It's coming with a political agenda. It's not coming from scientific groups. It's coming from politicians. You know, in February, the CDC from Beijing, the American CDC, who has an office in Beijing, they were on the ground here with the Chinese officials investigating this. It's a completely different mindset. You know, in the U.S., I think some people are outraged at this, but some people aren't. That people are listening to Trump and not doctors and scientists. And what Trump says doesn't always match what doctors and scientists say. When it comes to viruses, when it comes to investigations, it's not a political issue. It's not politicians that need to come to the table making demands. It's scientific bodies, scientific groups. If the CDC from Australia or the CDC from America wants to come and say, hey, how about we do this? And it's not coming with this politically loaded framework, I'm sure they would be so much more open to it. And when it's politicized, it poses the risk of just shutting them down, saying, no, I'm not going to participate in this. It doesn't necessarily mean that's a correct response, but you've got to understand how people are approaching this at the moment. No, yeah, so not a lot of people know that Tiananmen is used as a propaganda tool against China. I'm just looking through this, through the old comments. So what do I think China should do in terms of information warfare? I have no idea, because they're just crap at it. I think the best job they did so far was when they finally opened up about the classified videos with the terrorism in Xinjiang and declassified all of those videos of the terror attacks in the Kunming station, the people being run over in Tiananmen Square, and they really gave a detailed account of how some of these they kept that classified for so long. And again, that goes down to the poor decisions of how they handle information and communication here. But even with that, when they did a good job, how many people who think they know what's happening in Xinjiang? How many people who thinks that 20% of the Uyghur population in China is locked up in intern camps? How many of them actually took the time to watch that documentary and watch what the other side of the story is? 5%? Maybe you'd be lucky if it was 5%. And that says everything. People are not looking for the truth. They're looking for an excuse to demonize China. You know, I interacted with this guy on Twitter the other day. He uses it as an excuse to use the Chinese flag with the virus as his main Twitter image, which is extremely disrespectful. And then what I did was I was like, you know what? This guy really cares about the Uyghurs. Let me see what he says about the Aboriginal people in Australia, because obviously they've suffered a lot. They've been that's an actual cultural genocide. There was sterilization. There were kids that were put into residential schools specifically to teach them how to become more Western and basically just eradicate their culture. That's something that actually happened. And so when I searched through his Twitter history of years and thousands of tweets, he only mentioned the Aboriginal people of Australia once. And it was to joke about a video game that was taking a long time to be released or something like that. And he said, you know, by the time this game comes out, we'll probably have an old extinct Aboriginal language back, you know, in use. So basically the only time he's ever spoken about the Aboriginals was to use their extinct culture, which was helped to go extinct by them, to make a joke. And it's like, these people don't really care about the things that they're pretending to care about. It's an excuse to demonize China, or it's built up racism that they finally have an outlet for. And the way, the purpose of the Uyghurs is to use them to sprinkle on this fake good guy layer, to say, I'm not a good guy, I'm actually standing up for people who are oppressed. That's why I'm disrespecting the Chinese flag and being racist towards Han Chinese. It's like, it's all an excuse. They don't give a crap about real human rights. Let's see what else we got here. Biggest misconceptions about China, about I would guess just that they think people are like oppressed here. They don't have an outlet for their voice. They aren't able to overthrow local government officials. They don't have protests. You know, there've been multiple protests last year, and the protesters got what they wanted in China. The biggest misconceptions about China, that's a really big question, and I think there's so many things I could mention. Let me see what other comments are coming here. Kevin James, the Maori in New Zealand, I don't know too much about their struggles and what happened in the beginning, if they lost their way in the beginning, but I am really impressed with how, and again, I don't know enough about it to know if I'm mistaken on this, but I really respect how New Zealanders, European descent New Zealanders respect Maori culture, and they pretty much all know how to do the haka, the dance or whatever it's called. I mean, some of my ignorance is showing here, but when I talk to European descent New Zealanders, there's a strong sense of pride about Maori culture in New Zealand. How it actually plays out on the ground from a policy perspective, I'm not qualified to comment on. But New Zealand is one of those rare places where it looks like at least that they have so much respect for the indigenous people of the land. So big respect to New Zealand in that regard. Again, I might be missing out on some other issues there that I don't know about, but my surface understanding of it, that's what I have to say. Checking through this other stuff here. I saw somebody replying to somebody else saying you don't really want the truth. That's true for a lot of people. So let me see here. As I finally showed up, beginning to worry about me. I've been wasting too much time on Twitter, guys. I'm going to cut back, but I've got a few interviews coming on. I prefer on my YouTube channel. Most of you are going to know who he is. But I want to fit some of these random kind of videos or vlogs or daily life vlogs in also. But my real passion is doing the interviews. And so that's why I'm thinking of doing more things like this once in a while. I'll keep it a little bit more scheduled because like this is you guys know who are here, when I do a live stream, I just randomly say, okay, I'm going to turn on my live stream. I want to make something a little bit more scheduled. So one of my regular conversations is with you guys also. So you've seen my interviews where I sit down with the guy who was in the Tiananmen Square protest, or Eric. I'm trying to get Thomas, the RV guy, to talk about his history in Hong Kong, and just other people. And I want talking with you guys through chat to be one of those things that I do on this channel. Are you guys still here? The last comment came in 5 minutes ago. Oh, I've got to refresh the chat. That's why I'm not seeing some of these comments come through. So why do many people hate China so much when they don't actually know about China? That's a really good question. And I was at my brew pub a couple of nights ago, and we were talking about it, not thinking that it's a coincidence that the Five Eyes nations are all kind of Anglo-Saxon, English-speaking countries, and that it is, and this is something that's unpopular, because you know what? Talking about racism has almost become stigmatized. It's the same thing like if you say something that it's like, I think there's a connection here. It's so easy to use the word like a conspiracy theorist. And I heard this story that the word conspiracy theorist was really popularized around the JFK era, where people were talking about what's going on here. He was, one of the first presidents to challenge the Fed, and all these things didn't match up. And so to shut these people down, they really started to popularize the phrase conspiracy theorist. And ever since then, even if you talk about something factual, even if you talk about something with actual evidence, like the NED funding in Hong Kong and stuff like that, people like to just disregard these people as conspiracy theorists, even if they have all the evidence they need to prove otherwise. And so racism has almost kind of gotten to the same thing, where you just think you're using the race card. But in terms of getting back to the original point, the question about why are people hating on China so much when they don't really know anything about China, I think the idea of the next global superpower or how fast China is rising, and that potentially there's going to be a superpower that is not Anglo-Saxon, that is not white, it is, people from China, I think that scares a lot of people. I think they think that that's not right, that white people should be ruling the world. That was a theory that came up while I was kind of drinking with my friends at TAP. So it was a theory generated under the influence of alcohol, but it's an idea that people might not be willing to explore too much because it's easy to be disregarded as just trying to use a race card. But there's plenty of evidence to make that a valid thing to kind of look into. Anyone who knows what my brew pub is called, I just saw the comment, it's called Taps Brew Pub. Actually, if you use WeChat, you can find the official account, Taps Beer, TAPSBEER, and then you can find all the locations and everything like that. I'm usually in the main location, the first location when I go in, and then I met somebody actually 2 days ago. They came up to me and they said, "Hey, you're Daniel. I like your YouTube channel. It's the first time I've been recognized in the pub. Surprisingly, I haven't been going recently a lot, and I regret that I didn't get to talk to him more. But that's where I'm usually am. I was in the middle of that discussion I was talking about. So to the guy who keeps asking me, Indian Daniel, do you like curry? So this is a really strange question because I love curry. But the idea that you keep using Indian, even though I'm not Indian, but the idea that you think you use it as an insult it perfectly exemplifies these people who are against China, who pretend to care about ethnic minorities and who pretend to care about respecting human beings and stuff like that. It's those same people who come on my chat and try to say Indian Daniel like it's an insult. I don't take it as an insult. Indians are great people. It's a great country. There's so much great about the culture, including their curry. So yes, I like their curry. But I'm so glad that you showed up on my chat thinking that you're going to use this as an insult and representing the anti-China crowd, because it so perfectly describes exactly what I try to explain to people about people like you for continually trying to insult me in my chat by calling me an Indian, thinking that it's an insult. Hats off to you. You do a perfect job to really exemplify what I've always been trying to say. Yeah, the rise. So I've seen some other comments saying that they think that's what the problem is, the rise of China. It looks like that. So the renminbi, the first fully virtual currency, I don't think the entire reserves of renminbi will be digitized, but it does look like it will be the first official government blockchain currency. Of course, you have USDT, which is a cryptocurrency pegged to the US dollar, but it's not really a government project. That's a private company, and there's always a lot of questions in regards to whether they actually have the reserves to back up the amount of USDT, the tethers that they've printed. But in terms of official government currencies, it looks like China will do it. Russia came out really early last year, and they said that Putin said that they were going to go full on with blockchain also. But it does look like that China might have the first actual digital government currency. Opinion on the India-China border conflict. I haven't read up enough of that yet. I know it's a very complicated topic. I don't have enough information to give a really qualified opinion on that topic. Let me see. I've got to refresh my comments here for it to come up. Okay, so Sam, who keeps going on about thinking that because now it's not about insulting me, right? It's about insulting Indian people. You thinking that that's an insult. So I am going to be removing you. Have a nice day, Sam. Removed. Okay, so I got a super chat here. Thank you very much, Grace D, saying that Patrick. All right, let's see here. What else we got here? I might be missing some chats here, so I'm trying to get to as many of them as possible. Oh, here's a super chat. Daniel I didn't see that. Can you address people in the U.S. saying China doesn't have press freedom like in the West? So, there are plenty of newspapers that criticize the local governments and the local authorities and stuff like that. That's not disallowed. There are certain political things that will get removed. Everybody here understands that there is censorship here. And so I think that the situation is quite a bit less dangerous than overseas, where people think there isn't censorship, because there is. When the U.S. killed Soleimani, anybody who was reminding people that Soleimani was on his way to Iraq to have a peace mission with Saudi Arabia got removed from social media. And Facebook even posted it. They said, in order to comply with U.S. sanctions, we are removing people from Iran, or anybody who empathizes or sympathizes with them or something like that. It was the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. And so they have censorship in the West. Back when they removed all the Russian bots off of the internet, they couldn't prove that one of them was actually a bot, but they proved multiple ones were actual normal people. There was a pensioner from England, there was just a guy in the US, and they were labeled Russian bots to be removed. And what's interesting too is when Facebook hired that company to purge their system of Russian bots, it was connected to an NGO that got its funding from NATO and the arms industry. So, all right, that's kind of like a conflict of interest there, where you're going to remove people from social media saying political things that you don't like, and it's funded by people who run the arms industry. This was something that Max Blumenthal exposed, and it's got the entire paper trail. So, yeah, there's censorship in China. It's a lot more free than people think. People can criticize the government, but it's far less dangerous here because they understand that there's censorship, whereas overseas they have this illusion of freedom, and they don't think that they're being misled or coerced into a certain direction when actually they are. Whereas here there will be a level of skepticism about the media to a certain degree, but certainly more than the West. I mean, you hear a lot of people in the West saying fake news and calling all this stuff, but at the end of the day, nobody questioned that. There were people who questioned that. There were a few people, and they were removed off of the air. I think Geraldo, or whatever his name was. Obviously, the Dixie Chicks, they pretty much lost a bunch of their contracts after they spoke out against Trump also. There were a few others. But the idea that there were weapons of mass destruction based on falsified and exaggerated reports was something that was repeated from left to right, and people don't look back at that and reflect and say, whoa, if that could happen before, of course it could happen again. And what if it's happening right now? What if this crap we're being fed about China is exactly the same thing that we've seen before? People have the ability to look back and say, yeah, they pulled the wool over on our eyes in this one, but they, for some reason, don't want to believe that they're still in that situation. There's still a possibility of that happening, and it still is happening right now. I should interview Nathan Rich. He does some interesting stuff. His style is very different than mine, but I think I've said this before on my streams. I think he's a little bit of a lone wolf. He likes kind of doing his things that way, but yeah, his analysis. I like the way he does his analysis. He really breaks things down. And he did. I didn't like the idea of him doing the theory on the coronavirus coming from an American laboratory. Personally, I understand why some people appreciate that. Personally, I didn't like that. However, he did it way more responsibly than the Laowa 86 guy did, because he finished it off by saying, there's not enough evidence to say this is true. This is just for fun. It's just putting it out there. And what I liked about it was he showed how easy it was to make this narrative. So I guess I should say I appreciated it from that point of view. Whereas when Laowa 86 did his Wuhan lab thing, which there's a guy who, I should find the link to put it in the description, just ripped apart all of the falsehoods that he, and the things that he twisted to make his story. But he didn't finish off with a disclaimer saying, this is far from true. He really wanted to push the idea of this really looks like it's what's happening. So I respected Nathan Rich for that. At the end of his video, he gave that disclaimer. think I'm being bit by mosquitoes here. Oh yeah, Russia's media is tell their story. So Eric, so the bookseller thing, that's a very good question, and I don't have a good answer for it. I think they crossed the line, and I think there's times that the governments cross the line, more so elsewhere than here. But I don't want to make any excuses for that. I don't know the full story. I don't know exactly what happened. Obviously he was safe afterwards, but I think they crossed the line on that. I have no way to justify that, and I wouldn't even try to justify that. I haven't looked into it to say, okay, am I missing some facts that could allow? Oh, Taro Taylor. He's I've offered him before he wants to stay a little bit more anonymous. Maybe I could do one without his face on. I'm good friends with Taro. We've been in contact for a long time, and he was even supposed to come and visit me in my brew pub. But Taro Taylor, he really smart guy and has a lot of really great takes. All right, let's see. Let me go back to the main comments live chat. Yeah, so when I go to Xinjiang, I would really like to connect with some of the local YouTubers. That is something I thought of too. Oh, what does AMA stand for? AMA stands for Ask Me Anything. Trudeau's silence. I think it was funny. I think what I'm seeing with Trudeau, I got a question here asking about Trudeau's 21 seconds of silence on that question. I think it just shows, it's really interesting. In the beginning, Trudeau was hailed this hero, that he was the one that didn't submit to the really strong Trump handshake. Do you remember that? It's like, yeah, okay, he wasn't one of these world leaders that got pulled around like a rag doll by Trump. And now it looks like he's just turned totally docile, where he's like, oh my God, I better not say anything wrong about Trump. That's the impression I got from it. But that was funny. That was really funny. Okay, I'm gonna markets here. That's just the weirdest thing. It's basically they're like farmers markets here. The idea that they get rid of wet markets is I don't even know how to. There's some people who did some YouTube videos on visiting wet markets, and they did a good job explaining what it is and why people have this really weird idea, this weird concept about what wet markets are. Yeah, that's right. U.S. rendition CIA, the same as booksellers, I mean, look at what they're doing to Julian Assange. Also, I'm not going to try to say two wrongs make a right. That's for sure. But again, regarding that issue with the bookseller, I've got nothing I can think of that would justify that, and I wouldn't even try to. I think they crossed the line there. There may be some facts that I'm missing, but it just isn't something that I felt a real need to go out and search for a way to justify it. That's not really what I do anyways. You go to Xinjiang. Okay. I'm trying to get to some of these old comments. What is the depth of the NED funding and Hong Kong protests? So they feed money into a lot of organizations. If you look at like the CUHK on their 2014 annual returns, they show that they're taking money from U.S. NGOs and stuff like that. And there was the former Reagan administration, part of the Hudson Group and Chinese strategy in Washington, D.C. He admitted on camera that there's millions of dollars in funding going from NED to Hong Kong. And a lot of it goes to support kind of full-time dissidents and things like that. And it's kind of funny when you think about it. It's like, if Hong Kong is so unfree and in desperate need of democracy, why do they got to spend so much money to convince these people of that? Because that's all they're doing is they're supporting a minority of voices that really want to push this forward. And they're very good at creating dissent like this. They even managed to do it in my mother's country of Guyana. I've mentioned that story many times, where they didn't like Chetty Jagan, the president. He was too friendly with the Soviet Union, so they went in with funding and propaganda to create a racial war between the two main ethnic groups in Guyana, of Indian descent and of African descent. So, yeah, I got that. Hold on one second here. Questions. It's really hard to reload these questions. How can China increase the personal consumption for Chinese middle class and low income? You know, China's doing a really interesting thing. They're bringing back the hawker kind of industry, street sellers and stuff like that. It's already started. In Shenzhen, there's a couple places all over China where people are doing these street sales. And there's actually a joke going around that the Chengguan, they are the city management. They're responsible for enforcing city bylaws. And they don't have a good reputation even in China. I've gotten into arguments with the Chengguan at least 3 times. I've gotten pretty heated with them. But now the joke is that their job before, they had a quota to pull 3 street vendors off of the street every day. That was their quota. But now they have a new quota to find 3 street vendors to set up shop. So now they're calling all those old guys that they shut down and they're saying, hey, you remember me? Trying to get them to set back up. Let me see what else we got here. Wow, 600 people, guys. There's a lot of people in here. Are most of you kind of randomly coming in, or you're already familiar with my channel? I'm curious if anybody can chat. I just did this randomly. I didn't think I'd get this many people. I'm just scrolling through the comments here, guys, seeing if I missed any other interesting kind of questions. AMA means ask me anything for anybody who doesn't know, and I saw somebody asking that question a couple times. Okay, I'm going to do one more refresh of the comments, and then, oh, so you saw it pushed by the YouTube app. Yeah, David, welcome. You know, if you see me there, definitely say hi. So the South China Sea question is a good one, and I always thought it was quite cheeky how far China wanted to go with their claim. And one of my other friends, he explained it this way. I don't necessarily agree with him, but this is the way he explains it. He says that the Chinese Communist Party inherited a map. And so all they're doing is they're continuing on with what was already on this map, according to the Chinese, ancient history, that this is a part of China. And actually, compared to that map, they've actually retracted a bit. They've actually come back a little bit in some areas of the map, saying, okay, that's, move it to international territory, or write that myself first. But the one interesting thing that nobody really talks about, Kishore Mehbani, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. I should know it because I'm reading his book right now called Has China Won? He spoke about how Xi said very clearly that they had no intention to militarize these islands. And the only request they had was that America stopped its military patrols in the South China Sea. And after that, America actually upped them. They actually increased their military patrols. And that's when they said, okay, fine. And that's when they started militarizing them. So I think there's a little bit more to the story. And the question is why? Still, why do that? Well, if you look at where the U.S. has military bases and military connections, going from Afghanistan to South Korea with the THAAD missiles, all the way down and around to Australia, America basically has a military circle around China. So do you think that this, especially considering the conflict, this is the right time for the Chinese Communist Party to take their old maps and say, okay, all right, we'll start cutting off some of these land claims that we've had for hundreds or thousands of years? While that's going on, maybe they would be a little bit more open-minded to it if they weren't being circled by missiles from an increasingly aggressive rival. But for right now, I can kind of understand why they wouldn't do that. Just checking through the comments. Okay. I'm seeing some funny comments here too. All right, let me refresh the comments again. There's this. Being bit by mosquitoes. I don't know why there's so many mosquitoes today. Yeah, small entrepreneurship. I'm seeing that also. They're releasing, for small breweries, they're releasing some of the requirements, or not releasing. What's the word I want to use? Relaxing some of the requirements to make the barriers of entry lower for small businesses. Before, and this was quite annoying. Like 8 years ago, 9 years ago. You don't really get lobbying in China like you do. There is corruption. There was a lot of corruption before, but what a lot of the big companies here who dominated certain sectors. I'll give you an example, like the dental industry, guys who do dental appliances and things like that. What they do is that the big guys, the big players, they'll go to Beijing and they'll talk about the importance of maintaining quality and things like that, and that they want to make sure that these little guys don't come in because they'll bring the market down. They'll put out bad product that will give China a really bad reputation for poor quality product. So they convince Beijing to make the entry requirements for these businesses really difficult. So I think for dental factories, you need at least, I can't remember what it was, like 3,000 square meters, a certain number of employees, a certain number of capital investment. So for some small little guy who wants to open up a dental factory or, something like a dental appliances place, it's almost impossible. So there may be a point to what they were saying about when you open it up to everybody who can just put a few bench tables together and start making crap product. But the real motive, I think, was to just make it more difficult for new players to come in and grow to a point where they'll challenge these big players. I think that's what it's about. So what I think you're going to see now is a relaxation of that, a realization that, okay, we need to reduce the barrier to entry. We need to encourage more people to get in. Because there's a host of problems, obviously, if not everybody can participate, or the wealth gap continues to increase because the only people who are in are the people who managed to get in when the barriers of entry weren't that high to begin with. Okay. Good to see you, Scott. Am I part of Indian or South America Aboriginal? According to my DNA test, I do have some Aboriginal, or whatever you would call it, but it's very, very small. Pacific Islander, like a small percentage. But my father's British, he's white, and my mother's from South America, Guyana, of either of Bangladesh, India, kind of that region of descent. They don't know very much about their family history, actually, which is kind of a pity. Okay, let's see here. On the weekend panel, so I'll pop into the weekend panel once in a while. The problem is I kind of annoyed them a bit because my schedule is so messy that sometimes a few days before I'd say, guys, I don't think I can make this weekend. And they got really upset, so I still forced myself to join, which I understand. I made a previous commitment. They made all the flyers up. So I don't want to make commitments that I can't keep. I got a super chat here. Has China Won is a good read. Very, very good book. I'm not all the way through it yet, but amazing insights. Okay, I'm just scrolling through the comments here. Yes, it's raining here. That's the sound of raindrops. I actually love the sound of raindrops. That's one of my favorite sounds in the world. Clinking on the little, like, it's not metal roof, but excuse me. Oh no, my tea is done. There's two sounds, my favorite sounds in the world. One is the sound of raindrops. And the other is the sound of trains going over those old tracks, like the clack, 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 that kind of a noise. I used to live in Toronto, in the East Coast. I had two places. My first apartment was too close to the train to appreciate it. It was too noisy. Then my second place was a little bit of a distance. It's a place called Port Union in the east of Scarborough. And my house was far enough away from the inner city train in the Greater Toronto area. And after I watched Spirited Away by Hayao Miyazaki, a Japanese animator, They had one scene where the train was going across the ocean, and it was just this serene, like just beautiful scene that for some reason after that I fell in love with the sound of trains. It may sound weird, but if any movies could have an effect on your perception of the world, I think Hayao Miyazaki would be a good contender because, I mean, I'm sure most of you guys know his Studio Ghibli. Most of his films are just absolutely captivating. You know, there's certain movies you watch when you're a kid, and you watch them, and the movies take you away to a different world. And you remember it so vividly. So I'll give you an example. Like one of them was, oh shoot, I forget the name of the movie, but it's like this, they have this, the kid can go under his bed and then they go down into this world of monsters or something like that. I think it was with the same kid from Wonder Years, but I'm not sure. Anyways, whatever. I watched that movie and it just absolutely took me away, captivated me when I was a kid. Then when you rewatch that movie when you're older, you're like, this is kind of cheesy. It's like not really a good movie. And you lose the ability to have that wondrous feeling. But Hayao Miyazaki films from Studio Ghibli, when you watch his movies, you get that feeling inside you that you had when you were captivated by a movie when you were a kid. He has the ability to captivate an adult's imagination the same way that even the most basic of movies, you know, half-decent movies can captivate you when you're a kid, if you know what I mean. Okay, just scrolling through some of the messages again. So I don't know about, so I've got a really good question here. Do you think it would be a net positive or negative for China if it decoupled economically, politically from the US? So I don't know what would happen. I think there'd be, there's obviously some risks to that. You know, I remember when I was in Canada, I was working, there were so many jobs that were focused around reducing Canada's reliance on the US. And it doesn't seem like that was done, that was years ago, and it doesn't seem like that's been done in any sort of a meaningful way. So anything that reduces China's reliance on the US would be a good thing for China. I think that's been a wake-up call for companies like Huawei and things like that who are buying product from the US. It's not only America buying product from China, but Huawei relies on American suppliers. The idea that America could be a partner or a buyer that all of a sudden has government officials flying around the world trying to convince everybody else not to use Huawei. I think it's been an eye-opening experience for China that, sure, we can do business with the U.S., but we really better start, you know, not putting all of our eggs in one basket. And that's already obviously happening. But they really, it should put this idea of not relying on America too much into hyperdrive. And honestly, you know what? It should be a realization for everybody else too. All of these countries that are siding with the U.S. in this alliance against China, including this new, what is it called? I like to call it interplanetary, but what is it? Interpolitical something on China, started by Marco Rubio. These countries who are involved in this, they, just like last month or the months before, they had their PPE shipments stolen by America. Like they were, you know, Canada almost had, they got most of their supply of masks from 3M manufactured in the US, and America tried to block 3M from shipping any more masks to Canada, which would basically have left Canadian medical workers without masks at all. And it was only after Canada reminded the US and said, guys, just to remind you, do you know where 3M gets their supplies from, their materials from? Yeah, they get it from Canada. And then shortly after that, the US said, oh, okay, we can ship it. I don't know if the two are directly related, but I don't think it's really a coincidence. So these countries that are teaming up with America, after you can see what they're doing around the world and after you can see what they do to their own allies, it's really remarkable that other people aren't saying, maybe we should reduce our reliance on America. Maybe we shouldn't join this, you know, anti-China party that they keep trying to put together when they're doing all of these things, when it's America doing all these things to us. Yeah, isolationism isn't good for anybody. That's a really good comment, Arthur. And it's a discussion I've had with people from China quite a bit recently. And so some of the things I mentioned is, it was during the Qing dynasty that China closed off its borders. It thought it was so amazing that it didn't really need the rest of the world. And that was one of the reasons for its downfall during that time. And when you look at America, you look at a country like America, where so many of the major corporations, their top leaders, their top executives, were not born in the U.S. It was a very open and welcoming country who was willing to accept talent from anywhere in the world. And China's kind of the opposite. It still is kind of the opposite. How many companies in China, major influential companies, have executives who were not born in China? I believe Ping An has a pretty high-powered executive who was born outside, but obviously my point is incomparable to the U.S. So now you've got a situation where America is trying to close themselves off from everybody else. It started with the Muslim ban, right? Then it started with all these other crackdown on immigration. Then it started to them literally building their own Great Wall. This is all of the roles reversed. China should take this as an opportunity to jump on this and take over and use all the things that made America successful for themselves. Open up more, allow more. You know, I know that China a few months ago, they tried to open up immigration for foreigners, and there was a lot more. There was a lot of not hate, but kickback. I don't know the word I'm looking for, from Chinese netizens not being happy with the idea of allowing foreigners to immigrate to China. There was a lot of people who were saying that. And so this goes back to the government's very poor, ineffective ways of communicating with people. They need to explain to people, this is a huge opportunity that's being handed to us on a silver platter. While America is closing up, making the mistakes that China made during the Qing dynasty, we have the opportunity to not only learn from our old mistakes, but to take over or take advantage of the missteps in America right now, where they are becoming increasingly xenophobic and closed off to everybody else. I think this is something that really needs to be communicated far more effectively here. Just reading through the comments. My Hong Kong SIM card from China, and so I don't need a VPN to access YouTube. I'm just searching through some of the other. Yeah, how can Canada act like Canada first when they're so reliant on the U.S.? There's so many things that should have been a wake-up call for Canada. You know, in 1993, we captured a top Al-Qaeda terrorist traveling on fake passports in the Vancouver airport. The RCMP captured him and was questioning him, and the terrorist made one quick call to the U.S., and the FBI said to release him. He then went on to be one of the masterminds behind the embassy bombings in the Middle East, which killed dozens of people. Just because, yeah, we just listened to America. That should have been a wake-up call. We're like, you know, America's involved in a lot of shady stuff here. Maybe we should think twice by just blindly following them into their next campaign against whoever it is, or acting like they're lapdog on this Meng Wanzhou case. Okay, just scrolling through here. Yeah, you know, the Belt and Road is, I mean, it's amazing what they're doing in all these countries, and it's amazing how people are trying to paint this as such an evil thing. It's like, this is the first time a country has gone into these third world nations and these African nations and actually had a cooperative effort. They're not sending in soldiers with guns, they're sending in engineers and road builders and doctors, and people still have away from Western countries who had a very different approach to sharing the resources of third world countries. For them to be able to say, this is terrible, they're going in and they're building ports and all this stuff and hospitals for them. It's going to make them reliant on China. Oof, well, lucky they're not doing it your way, buddy. The way that your country used to do it. It's amazing how people are still able to twist that around. Banning Chinese drones, yeah. Just searching. There's a lot of comments. I can't get to all of them. I'm looking for some of the interesting ones. They don't necessarily need. It's still live. And Papa P, thank you very much. Eternal Optimist 63, thank you. How would you feel if communist USSR started this pandemic and then started acting as a savior for everyone else? Maybe you can clarify how China's acting as a savior for everyone else. What I see is they're just basically trying to defend themselves. And I think when they get a little bit more feisty, it has to do with people trying to criticize China and continually say that they did a bad job when they genome sequenced it in record time. They were in communication with the World Health Organization all this time. They released 200-page manuals on all of the best practices from hospitals about what did work and what didn't work. And I haven't seen China painting this as you should be thankful. But I will tell you personally, I think people should be thankful compared to how when viruses started elsewhere, the amount of information and valuable kind of material that they're providing the world for this is something definitely to be appreciative of. So if communist USSR, and I don't know why you have to say communist USSR, you can say any country. I think you're trying to paint a specific picture of a specific kind of system when you make this comment. If they did all of the same things and genome sequenced it in record time and released all of these thick manuals to try to help everybody else, then I don't think they should paint themselves as a savior, because that's a little bit cringy. I don't think that's what China's doing, but I definitely think people should be thankful. And I think if people don't think so, then it's them who needs a little bit of a perspective update. 3 million Hong Kong. You know, so I don't know. Did I mention Tom Cotton already in this live stream? I think I did. Yeah, like he created this thing where they want to take the Hong Kong. Was anybody here from the beginning and know if I mentioned how Tom Cotton has a very high approval rating from mainland Chinese at this point in time? Let me know if I didn't mention that story, and I'll scrolling through the comments here. There's a lot of comments coming through. 600 people. Thanks for joining me, everybody. Definitely a lot more people for a random live stream than I thought I'd have. And then I want to ask you guys a question, also a curiosity question from me. Especially anybody in the U.S. Is anybody in the U.S. looking at these protests and worried that we're in the middle of a pandemic and all these people are gathering in huge groups, and this is going to be a major spread point for coronavirus? And potentially in 1 or 2 weeks, we're going to see massive numbers of cases. This is the worst time for something like this to happen. I'm not going to get into whether it's justified or not, but just regardless, it's the worst time for this to happen. Is anybody getting nervous about this fact, about what's going to happen to the spread of coronavirus after this? Or is it just me? You know, because even if you stay at home after these protests are over, it just would have proliferated. It would have gone out so much that it's just going to be so. It's going to be so risky. It's pretty much going to be everywhere. Oh, sorry. When I'm scrolling through my comments, I keep scrolling over my camera too. I'm probably going to leave this this video up for a bit afterwards, so you can find the Tom Cotton story later. For the person who said they wanted me to mention it, and then I might move it to like I was thinking of doing like a subscriber section with some benefits and stuff like that to potentially make this into more sustainable regular thing. But the live streams will always be public still for everybody. I'm playing around with a few ideas, but then old live streams might go into there. Okay, just going through here. All right, guys, my battery's running low. I'm going to get to a few more questions, and then all right, guys. Is my son taking education in China right now? Yes, they are. It's it's kind of difficult. He's not in the public system, so it's kind of really difficult to compare. Yeah, that's a really difficult question to compare, especially because even like school where I grew up is going to be different today than it was then also. I mean, I grew up in a small town north of Toronto, and so I can say one thing is that they won't have to deal with kind of racism, even though they're mixed, kind of the same kind of racism I experienced. Or so I was born in England. My mother experienced quite a lot of racism in England. You know, I remember when I must have been like 3 years old, 4 years old, and she's walking down the streets in East End of London with us, the kids, and these skinheads just spit in front of her on the street. So I think it's a really complicated thing. I'm planning on doing an episode on race and racism. It's a topic I really like, but it's the one that you got to be really careful about because the race card is overused a lot. It's the card that people jump to so quickly. That it almost diminishes the word, and it diminishes people who really want to talk about it in an honest and meaningful way. So I'm kind of careful about it. But I've seen some people on my Twitter, some white friends who I have a lot of respect for, who almost seem to think that discrimination and racism is way more imaginary than it really is. And this again is a consequence of people overusing the race word, because there definitely is an overuse of the word racism. People jump to it too quickly by default. And it's understandable why. But because of that, it's created people who then deny that it happens at all. And I trust so many crooked, evil human rights activists who are actually funded by some of the most evil corporations in the world, these weapons companies and things like that. And they go around with this agenda, spewing these lies, where the word human rights activist, that should be a beautiful word. That should be a word that's like, oh wow, you're a human rights activist. At least when I was a kid, that's how I look at it. But now, if I hear the word human rights activist, I'm like, ugh, you know. But that's wrong. There are probably some good human rights activists out there. So it's the same kind of thing. It's just there's certain people. I think there really is a problem when people. Some of my white friends think that it's just a completely imagined issue, because that's definitely not the case. So from San Diego, most people don't care about the COVID-19, even during lockdown. Okay, so I was under the impression that people were worried about it enough beforehand, so maybe my question is kind of irrelevant. Oh, Nevada! I saw there was it? Oh no, it was the Las Vegas mayor where she had the most ridiculous interview ever talking about herd immunity. Yeah, roaming, but a lot of the Hong Kong SIM card plans, that data works in Shenzhen also. So it's connecting to the local towers, but you don't need to go through a VPN. It's completely open internet. Arthur still locked down, but still protests. I'm just going through some of the comments that came through during my long little rant there. Canada's a U.S. colony. Might as well call it that. Yeah, all schools in the world have some form of indoctrination. Every country rewrites history. Winners write history. Yeah, I guess you could say that, and some are worse than others, though, in what they try to push. So security law, Thomas, I spoke about earlier. It's definitely needed in Hong Kong. That's something you can find earlier in the stream. And yeah, let's see here. If you've got any final questions you want answered, just pass it through, because I'm about to, I'm going to shut this off soon. All right, guys, I think I'm going to wrap it up here, but thank you, everybody, for joining. This was way bigger than I thought it would be. Up to 600 people at some points here. But what I'll probably try to do is if I do these again, I'll try to give you guys a little bit more of a heads up. I'm really bad at that, but it'll make it a lot more fun, and we can probably get even more participation. So, okay, guys, you guys have a good rest of your weekend. If you're here around Shenzhen, also, have a good rainy weekend, and I will see you guys next time.